Hello, this is a revision video for Language Paper 2, Section B, and in this video we're going to focus on newspaper articles. For this paper, you're required to produce a non-fiction piece of writing. You'll be given a statement and you'll be asked to respond to this statement. It's most likely that you will be given the choice as to whether you agree or disagree with the statement, but you may be told which side of the argument you are to present. Regardless, it's important that you take time to plan and you work out both sides of the argument so you know where the strengths and the weaknesses of the response will be. We're going to focus on this example statement in this revision video. School uniform is an outdated concept. It should no longer be a requirement that students wear a prescribed outfit to school. Write a newspaper article in which you explain your opinion on this topic. So in this question, you have the choice as to whether you agree that school uniform is an outdated concept or whether you challenge that. It's really important that you plan your response before you start writing. You need to know both sides of the argument so you can work out which side gives you most to write about. It might turn out that you're writing about an argument that you actually don't personally agree with, but that you've got more to present, and so you're going to challenge yourself to choose an opposing viewpoint to your own. Now, I would suggest you start by drawing yourself a small table in which on one side you can present all the reasons to agree with the statement, so in this case that you agree school uniform is outdated, and on the other side of the table you come up with all the reasons to disagree, to suggest that school uniform still serves a purpose. Now you would start by listing all the different points in support of and against the statement that you have been given. That will then give you a really clear visual on which is the stronger side of the argument. From there, you're then able to choose which the best points are and in what order you're going to present them. Now, one of the most helpful things to do with this response is to adopt a character. So you want to ask yourself, who would have a vested interest in this subject? Who would have a particular personal interest in this subject? So for example, for school uniform, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a student, it could be a person who works in a school, it could be the uniform suppliers. But you want to ask yourself, who has a specific interest in this concept and who might be writing an opinion article about this topic? You don't necessarily have to write from your own perspective. Sometimes adopting a character can be a really, really powerful tool. In then choosing whether you're going to agree or disagree, you can adopt your character's mindset and you can work out whether your chosen character might agree or disagree with the statement and which of your points your character would believe are the strongest lines of argument. Once you've done your planning, it's important that you take some time to ensure that you've got a balanced argument. In doing so, we can draw on Aristotle's rhetorical triangle. Aristotle said there are three things that make a well-balanced argument. You need logic, reason, proof, and that can come through statistics or facts or case studies. It can come through comparisons, it can come through analogies and metaphors, and it can come through the structure of your writing. Alongside this, you also need pathos. You need a response that deals with emotions and value. You might be incorporating stories or anecdotes. This might make use of vivid language devices, maybe even inspirational quotes. And lastly, you need a sense of ethos. Your article needs to be credible. It needs to be something people can trust. This could involve a personal approach, and this is why adopting a character can be so important. It needs a confident delivery, and you need to be citing credible sources. So linking in to the logic and the case studies, you need to be able to quote people who are experts in their field. Now, of course, in an exam, you won't necessarily have quotes from genuine experts, so you might take a bit of poetic license and make up a quote from an extract, just as you might need to make up a statistical fact. The important thing with this, if you're making something up, is that it sounds plausible. Otherwise, you lose your credibility. This is a really helpful tool in your planning process. What you would want to do once you've got your table of notes and your agree and your disagree and you've chosen your side to argue, is you would want to revisit the points that you've made and ensure that you've got a balance of all three elements of Aristotle's triangle. If you do, perfect, you can move on to starting to think about writing. But if you don't, it might be that you need to just add a few more points to your planning table. So there's a specific structure that we can follow in writing our newspaper article that will help us meet the requirements of the mark scheme. Remember, for this question, just as with paper 1, you are being assessed on two separate things: the content and your organisation, and also your technical accuracy. Now, this suggested structure will really help ensure that you've got cohesion, that you've got focus, that your ideas develop, and therefore that you're hitting the upper levels of content and organisation. You need to start with a headline, a clear, simple statement. The next thing that you will do is your strapline, and we'll come back to these things in a second. A strapline, which is a single paragraph. You would then have a framing paragraph where you establish your character, and then you start in the real body of your article. You might introduce an opposing view, what the opposition thinks, and you would explain why they are wrong. And then you would have 3 paragraphs explaining your view or your character's view. You would finish with a short conclusion, and again, we'll come back to that in a second. The important thing with this is that although you're being asked to write a newspaper, you don't set it out in columns. The columns for a newspaper come in the production stages. You just write in straightforward prose. So let's have a think about headlines. Headlines need to be eye-catching. They need to set the tone for the article, they need to make it clear what it's about, and they need to hook the reader in. There are a range of techniques that you could use in creating a snappy headline. Perhaps you might use a pun, a play on words, otter devastation to suggest the chaos that otters are causing. Maybe you'll use alliteration, history in his hands. It might be that you want to employ a shocking statement. Challenger explodes, no hope for 7 in crew. Perhaps you want to evoke an emotional plea, betrayal of our bravest. Now life-saving kit for NHS heroes doesn't turn up. You might utilise triadic listing. Pasties, petrol and the politics of panic. And what you'll notice there is that that headline utilises both triadic listing, 3 things, but also alliteration. Now you might just have a triadic list without alliteration, but you may choose to have an alliterative list for extra oomph and power. The next thing that you want to include in your article after your headline is your strapline. A strapline will introduce the opinion that the article is conveying. And a powerful strapline could make use of triadic listing and a rhetorical question. You would start by introducing the topic, follow this with a colon and a triadic list. You would then finish with a rhetorical question. For example, school uniform, colon. It's archaic, expensive and restrictive. Is it time to consign it to the charity collection bags? Through doing this, we're hitting several elements of the mark scheme. We've got a rhetorical question, which is great for rhetoric devices. We've got a colon, which is super for technical accuracy. and our use of punctuation with accuracy. We've got a triadic list, another rhetoric device. And we've got two different types of sentences. We've got a question and we've got a sentence, and it is a declarative sentence. It's declaring a viewpoint. So just two short sentences, we are hitting several elements of both the content and organisation mark scheme and the technical accuracy mark scheme. Now, this can also be a really powerful tool for creating a cyclical structure to your writing. Remember, the reader or the examiner loves to know that this is a well-planned article, that you've thought about it, that you know where you were going to end up before you even started writing. And a cyclical structure is a really easy way to do that. At the end of your article, as your conclusion, you could repeat your strapline but convert your question to a statement. This would then become your concluding paragraph. School uniform, : it's archaic, expensive and restrictive. It's time to consign it to the charity collection bags. So again, we're fulfilling several elements of the mark scheme. We've got our cyclical structure to create cohesion for the content and organisation. Again, we're demonstrating different sentence types, accurate punctuation, and we're showing that we are ending on a very definite note. A cyclical structure can be very, very powerful in ending with a strong message, that very same strong message that you opened with. To support your well-structured argument, a framing paragraph comes next. So you have your headline, your strapline, and then a framing paragraph. A framing paragraph is a short paragraph establishing the perspective from which you are writing. It's your opportunity to make it clear to the reader who your chosen character is. A framing paragraph follows on from the strapline in its tone and sentiment. So just as your headline and strapline make it clear what opinion you're presenting, so too will your framing paragraph. For example, as a mother of 5, when September approaches, I can feel my purse break out in hives, wondering how it is ever going to magically muster the money for all the new uniform my children will inevitably require. Hand-me-downs are all well and good when your children go to the same school, but when they attend different schools and require gender-based attire, it's difficult to be financially savvy. So in this short paragraph, I've established the perspective that I'm writing from. I'm writing as a mother who finds the concept of uniform very expensive. You can see that I've got some language devices in here. I'm drawing on a sense of credibility, I'm drawing on emotion, and there's a sense of logic and reason with the fact that uniforms are gender-based and that they can be expensive. So even within this one short paragraph, I'm drawing on the elements of Aristotle's triangle to create a well-balanced idea. Now, as you'll notice, just as in that example framing paragraph, there were some different devices that we could use. There are lots of different language devices we can employ within our writing, and on this slide we're just going to talk through some helpful rhetoric devices. It's really important that you don't view this as a checklist. The key to success with any piece of writing is to know when to use a certain device and when to refrain. So while we talk through these devices, it's important to note that you are not expected to use every single one of them in your article. In fact, overcrowding of rhetorical devices can actually be more detrimental than it can be helpful. The first device that you might find helpful is alliteration, and we've talked about alliteration in a headline, but you might include it within your text as well, just as I did in my framing paragraph. Remember, alliteration could include plosive sounds or fricative sounds or sibilant sounds, and you want to think about the type of alliteration and how that helps set the tone. You might make use of anaphora, the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of several sentences or clauses. Maybe you'll use the opposite of that, epistrophe, the repetition of a word or phrase at the end of several sentences or clauses. You might use hyperbole, that deliberate exaggeration for effect. You might use hyperphora, the act of asking a question and then answering it immediately. So rather than a question being rhetorical, there is a definite answer that the writer provides. You might use litotes, the deliberate understating for effect. Maybe you'll use metaphor, that act of comparison. You might employ what we call parallelism, which is the use of components in a sentence that are grammatically the same or similar in their construction, sound, or meaning. For example, the mistakes of the fool are known to the world, but not to himself. The mistakes of the wise man are known to himself, but not to the world. Of course, you might make use of rhetorical questions, and if you're following the strapline structure, you will definitely be making use of rhetorical questions. You might use the other comparison style of the simile, that comparative like or as, and triadic lists. And again, if you're following the strapline formula, you will definitely be using triadic lists. As I say though, remember this is not a checklist of techniques that you must include. It's very important that you work out which of these techniques and devices will be helpful to the sentiment or to the opinion or to the tone that you are trying to create in that specific paragraph. So now it's over to you. The best way to revise is to plan your answers. On this slide, you've got 5 different options. Why not use the processes discussed in this video to have a go at planning a newspaper article in response to one of these techniques? Thank you for listening.